There was a time you two used to fight. Really fight. Raised voices, slammed doors sometimes, the kind of argument that left you both a little shaken afterward. And somewhere along the way, that stopped. No more raised voices, no more slammed doors, just a kind of calm that settled over the house. If you're watching this, some part of you has probably already noticed that this calm doesn't feel like peace. It feels like something else, something you can't quite name yet. Stay with me, because I'm about to explain exactly what that feeling is, and why the absence of fighting is very often the loudest warning sign a marriage can give. Here's what almost nobody tells you about conflict in a relationship. Fighting, as unpleasant as it is actually a sign of investment. When two people argue, they're implicitly saying, "This still matters enough to me that I'm going to push back, defend my position, try to get you to understand where I'm coming from." It's uncomfortable, but it's active. It means both people are still reaching toward each other, even if the reaching looks like conflict instead of tenderness. The opposite of that isn't calm. The opposite of that is indifference. And indifference is far more dangerous to a marriage than any argument ever was. When couples stop fighting, most people assume it means they've resolved their issues, matured past the pettiness, learned to communicate better. Sometimes that's genuinely true. But far more often, especially when the shift happens suddenly rather than gradually through actual growth, what's really happened is that one or both partners have quietly stopped believing the fight is worth having. Not because the issue got resolved, but because somewhere along the way, a private, unspoken conclusion got reached. This isn't going to change, so what's the point of bringing it up again? That conclusion is one of the most dangerous moments in a marriage, and it almost never gets announced. Nobody sits their partner down and says, "I've given up on us changing this." It just happens, quietly, internally. And the external sign of it is exactly what you're living right now. The absence of conflict where conflict used to be. Let's talk about what this actually looks like in daily life, because it's rarely as dramatic as the word giving up suggests. It looks like not mentioning that something hurt your feelings, because you've started to assume it wouldn't change anything if you did. It looks like answering, "I'm fine," to the question of how you're doing. Not because you are fine, but because explaining otherwise feels like more effort than it's worth. It looks like noticing an old irritation resurface and choosing, almost automatically now, to swallow it rather than raise it, because you've quietly cataloged, somewhere in the back of your mind, all the times raising it before didn't lead anywhere. This pattern has a name in relationship research, and it's often called stonewalling or withdrawal. But the plain language version is simpler. You've stopped bringing your full self into the relationship because some part of you has concluded it's not received well, or not received at all. And the tragic part is that from the outside, and sometimes even from the inside, this can look like maturity. It can look like you've both just gotten calmer, more accepting, less reactive. But calm that comes from resignation is a completely different thing than calm that comes from genuine resolution. And the difference matters enormously for where the marriage is actually headed. Here's a distinction worth sitting with directly. Resolved calm feels light. When a couple has actually worked through a recurring issue, there's a sense of relief attached to the topic. A feeling of, we figured that out together. Resigned calm feels heavy, even though it's quiet. There's a flatness to it, a sense that the topic isn't gone, it's just been buried, and some part of both people knows it. If you've noticed that certain subjects have simply disappeared from your conversations, not because they got resolved, but because they got too exhausting to keep raising, that's resigned calm. And it's usually a sign the relationship has quietly moved into a kind of maintenance mode, where the goal has shifted from connection to simply not making things worse. One of the clearest signs this has happened is a shift in what each of you brings to the other. Early in a relationship and in healthy stretches of a marriage, people bring each other their bad days, their frustrations, their half-formed thoughts, because there's an underlying trust that the other person wants to hear it, even the messy parts. When a marriage has quietly gone numb, people start editing themselves before they even open their mouths. You mention the easy version of your day. You leave out the part where you cried in the car, or the part where you're furious at your boss, or the part where you're scared about something. Because some quiet calculation has already run in the background, telling you it's not worth bringing here anymore. This editing is almost never a conscious decision. Nobody wakes up and decides to stop being fully honest with their spouse. It happens one small disappointment at a time you brought up something that mattered to you and got a distracted response. A time you tried to start a hard conversation and it went nowhere. A time you expressed hurt and got defensiveness instead of curiosity. Each of those moments is small on its own, but they accumulate into a kind of quiet contract that neither of you signed on purpose. I'll stop bringing you the real version of me, and you can stop bringing me the real version of you, and we'll call this peace. Before I go further, I want to name something. If you've noticed certain topics have just quietly disappeared from your conversations, not because they got resolved, but because they got too exhausting to keep raising, that's not proof the marriage is beyond repair. It's a pattern, and patterns can be interrupted. That's exactly why I put together the Complete Marriage Rescue Trilogy, 3 guides for every stage of a marriage crisis, including how to safely reopen the things you've both quietly stopped bringing up. The link is in the first comment below. I'll come back to it before we're done. Now, here's the trap that makes this especially hard to notice while it's happening. There's a particular trap that makes this especially hard to notice while it's happening, which is that the absence of conflict often gets mistaken for a healthy relationship by people around you, and sometimes by yourselves. Friends comment on how calm you two seem compared to other couples who are always arguing. You might even feel a flicker of pride about it, a sense that you've figured out something other couples haven't. But calm that comes from 2 people quietly retreating from each other isn't a relationship skill. It's a symptom that's been mistaken for a strength, and the mistake tends to go unnoticed for a long time, precisely because it looks, from a distance, exactly like what a good marriage is supposed to look like. It's worth being honest about what usually causes a couple to reach this point in the first place, because it rarely happens overnight. Often it starts with one specific issue that got raised, unsuccessfully, several times. Something that never got resolved, never got acknowledged, or got acknowledged briefly and then repeated anyway. After enough rounds of raising the same thing and watching nothing change, most people don't escalate further. They simply stop. Not because the issue stopped mattering, but because the cost of continuing to raise it, emotionally, started to outweigh whatever benefit came from trying one more time. That stopping point, that decision to go quiet instead of continuing to push, is usually the real moment the marriage started dying, far more than whatever argument came before it. There's also a version of this that develops more from exhaustion than from any single unresolved issue. A slow accumulation of life stress, parenting demands, work pressure, and simple fatigue that leaves neither partner with the emotional bandwidth to engage in conflict the way they used to. In this version, nobody gave up on the marriage exactly. Both people just got tired, and conflict takes energy neither of them currently has. This is a gentler version of the same pattern, but it deserves the same attention because unaddressed exhaustion tends to calcify into the same kind of resigned distance over time, even without a specific grievance driving it. Here's something that might be hard to hear, but it matters. The silence itself is often more corrosive to a marriage than the original disagreement ever was. An unresolved argument about, say, how household responsibilities get divided is a solvable problem. A marriage where that argument used to happen and now simply doesn't where one partner has quietly decided it's easier to do more than to keep asking, isn't dealing with a solvable problem anymore. It's dealing with a slow withdrawal of investment that has nothing to do with household chores at all, and everything to do with whether either of you still believes the other person is capable of actually hearing you. So, what do you do if you recognize this pattern in your own marriage right now? The first and hardest step is naming it, directly, out loud, in a moment when you're both calm, rather than already frustrated. Something like, "I've noticed we don't really argue anymore, and at first I thought that meant things were good, but I think it might actually mean we've both stopped bringing up things that bother us. I want to understand if that's true for you too." This kind of statement does something crucial. It reframes the silence itself as the topic, rather than any single grievance buried underneath it, which makes it far less threatening to discuss than reopening an old, specific wound cold. The second step is testing the theory, gently, rather than assuming it's already confirmed. Bring up one small thing that's been bothering you, something low stakes enough that it won't feel like a referendum on the whole marriage. And pay close attention to how it's received. Do you get genuine curiosity? Or do you get the same deflection or defensiveness that trained you to stop bringing things up in the first place? That response tells you an enormous amount about whether the door is actually open again, or whether it's going to take more deliberate work to reopen it. It's also worth understanding that rebuilding the willingness to have real conflict again usually requires making it explicitly safer than it used to be, not just hoping it becomes safer on its own. That might mean agreeing on some basic ground rules together. No bringing up old grievances during a new disagreement. No walking away mid-conversation without naming that you need a break and will come back to it. No using something vulnerable that gets shared as ammunition later. These aren't romantic gestures. They're structural changes that make honesty feel less risky. And honesty only comes back once it stops feeling risky. There's also real value in distinguishing between the topics that actually need resolving and the ones that were never really the point. Sometimes what looks like a fight about dishes or schedules is actually a fight about feeling unappreciated or unseen. And no amount of negotiating the actual logistics will fix it, because the logistics were never really the issue. If you're going to start engaging again, it helps enormously to ask yourselves honestly what the argument was actually about underneath the surface topic, because addressing the real thing tends to create far more relief than winning the surface argument ever does. If you try to reopen this and find that your partner meets you with genuine relief, even if it's a little awkward or clumsy at first, that's an extremely good sign. Relief usually means they've been feeling the same distance and didn't know how to name it either. And awkwardness is simply what it looks like when two people are relearning a skill they used to have and lost through disuse. If instead you're met with continued flatness, no real engagement, no curiosity about what you're bringing up, that's important information too, and it might mean the repair needs outside support. Or it might mean you're dealing with a deeper level of disengagement than a single conversation can fix on its own. Where does this leave you, right now, sitting in whatever version of quiet your marriage has settled into? If it's been a long time since you actually fought about something that mattered, that absence isn't necessarily proof that everything is fine. It might be proof that somewhere along the way, one or both of you quietly decided the fight wasn't worth having anymore and mistook that decision for peace because it was easier than facing what it actually meant. That's not a life sentence for the marriage. It's a pattern, and patterns can be interrupted, but only once they're actually seen for what they are, instead of mistaken for calm. Everything we've talked about today is the diagnosis, how silence gets mistaken for peace, and why that silence is often more corrosive to a marriage than the original disagreement ever was. But understanding that is only half of it. The other half is having an exact way to reopen it safely, how to name the pattern out loud, how to test whether the door is actually open again, and how to make honesty feel less risky than it currently does. That's exactly what the Complete Marriage Rescue Trilogy gives you. 3 guides for every stage a marriage crisis can take. So reopening this doesn't have to be a guess. The link is in the first comment below. Go check it out the moment this video ends. Before we end today, here's the one thing I want you to take with you. Real peace in a marriage comes from 2 people who've actually worked through what stood between them and come out the other side lighter. Quiet that comes from 2 people who've simply stopped trying isn't peace at all. It's grief, wearing the costume of calm. And the first step back toward each other isn't a bigger fight. It's one honest sentence, said gently, admitting that the quiet has started to feel like something you're both a little afraid of.